A few weeks ago, I was talking to someone at church, and we were talking about the fact that we're hearing more and more statistics of young people leaving the church in their young adulthood. And that's something that's always been on my mind, something that drives me to do what I do and the work that I do. And I wanted to tell you there's a really good article with some statistics in it by Aaron Earls. It's by Lifeway Research. And the article is Most Teenagers Drop Out of Church as Young Adults. So if you want to, visit that website and check it out. Lifeway does a lot of research into these things and has statistics there. But in that research, it says 66% of young adults will leave the church between 18 and 22, the age of 18 and 22. 66%. In that article, there's also a quote. It says, "The reality is that Protestant churches continue to see the new generation walk away as young adults, regardless of any external factors. The Protestant church is slowly shrinking from within." That should be a wake-up call to all of us. I wonder, as we look at this series, and this is where it was born in, this idea, we were talking about these things, and what conditions are we cultivating at our church for young people? Now, I get it, they make their own choices in young adulthood, but are we doing everything we possibly can to help them cultivate good soil? That if someone does walk away, we welcome them back with open arms. That they understand the grace and the mercy of Jesus Christ. That in those moments, if they do turn away, that they feel that they can come back and we'll welcome them with open arms. And how are we cultivating soil at our churches? Are we cultivating a faith that's real? Something that has life and is life-giving to them? And so I wonder, what can we do from our perspective? And so this is where the parable of the sower came out of. And today we look at the rocky soil. Let's read from Matthew chapter 13, verse 3. "A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it didn't have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. But still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown." This is the parable of the sower that Jesus talks about. And what I love about this story is that Jesus goes on to explain it. And so this week we'll be talking about the rocky soil. Last week we talked about the path. We talked about the hardened heart, the soil that the seeds couldn't even penetrate. And this week we're going to talk about rocky soil. And it's different in our story. As you heard in our story, it's actually in verses 5 and 6 from Matthew 13. It says, "Some fell on rocky places where it didn't have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root." Jesus goes on to explain this part of the parable, and he says, this is in verse 20 and 21. "The seed falling on the rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away." This is really important to our passage today as we talk about this rocky soil. You may look at this and say, well, they did a little better than the path. At least they started along the path. As you think about that and you think about the conditions of a heart, there are many times that we compare ourselves to other people and say, well, I'm a lot better off than that person, aren't I? And that's a dangerous thing, because as Jesus tells this parable, both these paths in life, both these soil conditions, both these heart conditions, they both end up short of heaven. I was reading in Matthew Henry's commentary, and it said this quote, and I'll read it to you. It says this: "A ship without ballast." Now, for those of you young people that don't know what ballast is the weight in the bottom of a ship that keeps it from toppling over in a storm when the waves are bad. The ship without ballast, though she may at first outsail a weighted vessel, will certainly fail in the storm and never come back to port. You know, when trials and tribulations come, it can be a test of our faith. You know, Proverbs 24:10 says, "If you falter in times of trouble, how small is your strength." And you know, as we look at this idea of this condition of the heart and this idea of being rocky soil, we're looking at someone who hears the gospel message and immediately they come out with great joy and great energy, and they're fervently following the Lord, and they're saying, "Wow, I'm so excited about my faith." But difficult times come along and they fall away. You know, there's a lesson to be learned here that Jesus is teaching us. You know, and I think it's a deep truth that we begin to understand this principle. You know, God doesn't tell us in the Bible that our life here on earth will be easy, but he tells us that our eternal life in heaven will be. You know, God doesn't say he'll remove all trials and tribulations from us in life. He tells us that he'll walk with us through them. And that's a deep truth that we all need to understand. And I'll tell you, as we're sitting around here and things have been very different, our idea of fellowship in the church has been much different, hasn't it, during the COVID-19 outbreak? But I want you to think about the role of the church in coming alongside new believers and also coming alongside people who are on rocky ground and difficult times. We all hit difficult times, every person. And if we begin to understand and convey the message to young people, to people new in the faith, that, you know, we'll stand with you in that. That in those moments to push in towards God, push in with all you have towards God, and wake up in the morning and pray to him and say, "Lord, I feel like I'm in the storm. I feel like I'm in trouble. Lord, help me through this time." That is a deep truth. And if you begin to understand that God doesn't always take us away and remove us from trouble, but he'll walk with us through them. I think that's what Jesus really wants us to understand as we talk about the rocky soil and how to cultivate good soil. In this part of this passage, it says, when trouble and persecution came, that new Christian, they quickly fell away. You know, and I believe it's the role of the church to come alongside people in their hours of greatest difficulty, put their arm around them and say, "Hey, we're going to walk with you through this."